Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, zerilli-marimò. It's a great pleasure for me this evening to host the presentation of Simone Somekh's first book, Grandangolo. It's a book that for now is only out in Italian. It is being translated into French, I understand, and hopefully into English, maybe with this evening giving the right amount of help. So what I'm asking you to do is let people know where you are, what you're doing, and let them know about Simone's book. If you need to connect to your Wi-Fi, these are the information you need for that. So normally in other institutions, they invite you to turn off your cell phones. I invite you to turn them on and let people know what you're doing here. Unfortunately, I don't have my usual set of devices from which I read my notes, but the two people I'm going to present, I'm friendly and familiar enough with to be able to introduce without my notes. And first of all, Simone, I've already mentioned, he's a graduate student here at New York University in international journalism. He has studied in Italy, in Israel, and in New York. He spent his junior year of high school in Boston. He's originally from Turin, and he's writing a thesis for his master in international journalism on Arab startups in Nazareth, and he spent several months there. He just came back from Italy, where he toured the peninsula to present Grandangolo to a great deal of acclaim and success, from what I could see from reviews and other reports of these presentations. And while a graduate student here at NYU, he was in Professor Jane Tylus' class last fall. And Professor Tylus is a dear colleague here in the Department of Italian Studies, and she's also a professor of comparative literature. Her main area of studies is early modern Italy, and her specialty is in another case of religious ultra-orthodoxy. Simone deals with ultra-orthodox Jews. Jane, most of her life, dealt with ultra-orthodox Catholics, such as Catherine of Siena. That is one of the major points of her interest. But her latest book is on Siena more openly. So she went to Siena for her interest in Catherine, and then she remained there and she published this brilliant book that is a sociological, cultural history of one of the most fascinating cities in the Italian peninsula. And Jane has also a very keen interest in literary translation, and that's the course she was teaching in which Simone sat. So I thought it was a perfect fit to have Jane and Simone on the stage to discuss Grandangolo together. And the weird things you see tonight is that on the occasion, here another one, on the occasion of the presentation of Simone's book that is called Grandangolo, literally wide angle, we are testing a series of little new devices that will allow us to present in live streaming in wide angle the presentation. So I couldn't think of a better occasion to start our new technological innovations. And without further ado, I would like to ask you to welcome very warmly to the stage Professor Jane Tylus and Simone Somekh. Please do.
Well, Stefano, thank you so much for that lovely welcome. It really is a treat for me to be here with my former wonderful A student, Simone, who did a fabulous job in a course in the fall on Renaissance translation, and who is now here to present to us his book. We always know that it's slightly difficult for people who haven't read a book to come to a session where we talk about it. But Simone and I thought that a wonderful way for him to begin would be literally to dive right in with a chapter or part of a chapter that he'll be reading in Italian. There will be a translation on the screen. That is really, I think, one of the kernels of this fascinating book about a young man's coming of age, which in conversation we will be able to unpack for you in the next half hour or so. But we'll start out. Simone.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you everyone for coming. I know we have many people also watching from Italy, even someone from Japan. That's crazy. Wow. So I'm gonna, was asking.
Of course.
So, as you know, my book is about a young man who is raised in an Orthodox Jewish community in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. And for his bar mitzvah, he receives a camera. And this camera will be his companion in his journey, in his discovery of the world. I'm reading now from a scene in Italian, and you'll be able to see the translation in English on the screen. And this is the scene in which Ezra, my protagonist, travels back into his parents' home after 2 years of being far away, and meets with his mother, and they have a conversation. Can I get just more light on the page? Thank you. La casa dei miei genitori era silenziosa, quasi priva di vita. La mia stanza era rimasta immutata. Sembrava che nessuno vi fosse entrato per anni, e forse era proprio così.
La traduzione non è quello che stai leggendo.
Oh, just a little further. My parents' house was quiet. I'm sorry about that. It's my fault. A differenza dei miei genitori, visibilmente invecchiati. Entrambi erano dimagriti, avevano più rughe sul volto e meno forza in corpo. Il loro solenne movimento verso una vecchiaia precoce pareva essere avvenuto in maniera sincronizzata. Mi sedetti sul letto in cui Carmi aveva dormito durante il suo soggiorno in casa nostra. Mia madre entrò nella stanza senza dire nulla. Che nostalgia, dissi, scosso da un singhiozzo. Già, che nostalgia, ripeté sottovoce lei, sedendosi accanto a me e stringendomi al suo petto. Non credo ci stessimo riferendo alla stessa persona, ma entrambi mancava qualcuno, ed entrambi stavamo soffrendo per la sua assenza. E non era importante se per me quel qualcuno era Carmi e per lei era zia Susi. L'importante era che in quel momento fossimo vicini. Mi sei mancato, Ezra. Ho pregato giorno e notte Dio che tornassi da noi, a far parte della nostra vita. Non risposi. Sono stati anni durissimi. Non so perché sia andato tutto così storto. Non so perché Dio ci abbia sottoposto a queste sfide. Dal momento in cui è morta la signora Taub, sono accadute così tante disgrazie, un interminabile flusso di negatività. Ma abbiamo fede, almeno io ho tanta fede. Anche queste difficoltà avranno un significato positivo. È vero, è stato difficile, dissi. È stato difficile stare qua, disconnesso dalla vostra realtà e dalle vostre idee. Ed è stato difficile costruirmi una vita indipendente, lontano da tutto ciò che conoscevo. Zia Susi è stata una zia formidabile, mi ha supportato in ogni momento della mia vita, ma io questo non gliel'ho mai detto. Non ho mai espresso la mia gratitudine nei suoi confronti, o forse non l'ho neanche provata fino ad oggi. Oh Ezra, disse mia madre, mi spiace così tanto che sia stato tutto così difficile. Credo che per Carmi sia stato più difficile che per tutti noi, non trovi? Non so, Ezra, non so. È stato tutto così sbagliato. Ho passato notti intere a pensarci. Le lacrime sparirono dai miei occhi, che divennero 2 fessure. Hai passato notti a pensarci? Questo è quello che hai saputo fare? Pensarci? Mia madre restò perplessa. Si era aspettata che sarei esploso e che l'avrei attaccata prima o poi, ma non così presto. Non mi lasciai fermare dal suo sguardo spaventato e proseguii. Perché sei così passiva? Carmi è andato via, o è stato cacciato, non lo sappiamo, e la comunità è rimasta a guardare senza dire niente. Neanche il rabbino ha mosso un dito. Tutti hanno passato notti intere a pensarci, ma nessuno ha osato agire. Perché è meglio non affrontarli certi problemi, giusto? Sono troppo scomodi, eh? Non aggredirmi, mi disse, toccandomi il polso. Era una questione familiare dei Taub. Non potevamo intrometterci. Il signor Taub aveva ottenuto la piena responsabilità su suo figlio. Cosa potevamo fare? Non avevamo intenzione di contestare la decisione degli avvocati. Cosa c'entrano gli avvocati? Cosa c'entra il signor Taub? C'era un ragazzo che stava soffrendo e la comunità è rimasta inerte. Ezra, disse mia madre, mi stai incolpando di questioni in cui io non c'entro, non ho voce, non ho autorità. Se Carmi stava male e noi non potevamo aiutarlo, non vedo perché dovresti accusarmi di esserne responsabile. Non tu, mamma. Non sei tu la responsabile. Siete voi come collettività, voi come la comunità ortodossa di Brighton, voi come l'ebraismo ortodosso, voi. Questa volta fu il suo turno di restare in silenzio. Guardai fuori dalla finestra. L'autunno bostoniano aveva già cominciato a colorare gli alberi di rosso, arancione e marrone, mettendo in scena uno spettacolo che a New York mi era mancato. Ma dentro quella casa nulla sembrava mutare. I miei genitori erano ancora accecati dalla fede e io dalla rabbia. «Resterai per Rosh Hashanah?» chiese dopo qualche minuto mia madre. Il capodanno ebraico sarebbe iniziato la settimana seguente. «Non lo so, mamma. Questo posto è troppo incasinato. Io sono troppo incasinato, non so». Papà neanche mi rivolge la parola. «Perché? Tu gliela rivolta? L'hai malapena salutato». «Devo ricordarti come mi ha trattato quando ho deciso di non andare a studiare in yeshiva?» Ezra esordì, ma poi non disse nulla. Si teneva una mano nell'altra come per proteggerle dalle parole affilate come lame che uscivano dalla mia bocca e forse per ricordarsi di averle entrambe. Fissando il pavimento con gli occhi lacrimanti sussurrò: «Cosa abbiamo sbagliato?» Cosa avevano sbagliato? Tutto, di più. Avevano sbagliato a crescermi in quel modo di certezze e regole ferree, quel mondo di tabù e proibizioni. Avevano sbagliato a volersi a tutti i costi adattare a una comunità di cui in realtà non si erano mai sentiti davvero parte. Avevano sbagliato nelle loro scelte, nelle loro priorità. Alzai lo sguardo verso mia madre. Non mi avete mai dato la possibilità di scegliere. La fede è una questione così personale, così soggettiva, invece voi me l'avete sempre presentata come l'unica opzione. Non mi avete mai mostrato l'esistenza di diversi tipi di ebraismo. Mi avete ingozzato del vostro e basta. E quando ho deciso di prendere una strada diversa dalla vostra, mi avete sbattuto la porta in faccia. «Questo è ciò in cui crediamo», ribatté mia madre con fermezza. «Come avremmo potuto crescerti dicendoti che ci sono altre opzioni, altre religioni, altri stili di vita che tu puoi adottare? Sarebbe andato contro tutti i nostri principi». Senza smettere di fissarla negli occhi, le sputai la mia verità in faccia. «Vi siete preoccupati così tanto di far combaciare tutti i pezzi che avete perso di vista quelli più importanti. Volevate una comunità e vi siete lasciati scappare la famiglia. Volevate Dio e vi siete dimenticati degli uomini. A volte penso che abbiate guardato alla realtà attraverso un grandangolo. Pur di allargare gli orizzonti, avete permesso che la vista degli oggetti in primo piano venisse deformata». Un singhiozzo dopo l'altro, mia madre mi abbracciò e io seppi che per quanto si sentisse ferita dalle parole, per quanto parte di lei credesse che dicessi la verità, nulla a Brighton sarebbe mai cambiato. Potevo cambiare io, poteva cambiare il nostro rapporto, ma loro avevano preso posizione, si erano schierati e ormai era troppo tardi per tornare indietro. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Simone, for that wonderful, fluid reading. And I should say, too, Simone did 99% of the translation. So you learned something in my course. So that was awesome. But
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if we could start by just unpacking a little bit the chapter or the section of the chapter you just read. I think that giving our audience a sense of who our protagonist is, Ezra, why he's no longer living at home, who Carmi is, because Carmi is clearly a main protagonist in the story, and he comes up very briefly, but in a very important way in what you've just read. And finally, as I'm sure the audience may have noticed, the word Grandangolo, so the title of this book, appeared toward the very end of what you just read, and given that it does mean a wide-angle lens, which we are actually seeing on display tonight, thanks to Stefano in this room, I'm curious if you could say a little bit about this use of the wide angle as a kind of both a metaphor but also as a literal way of framing your book.
Thank you. Thank you also for helping out with the translation of the piece. So I imagined this character, Ezra, and I imagined that he would be kind of a rebel. And I gave him a pretty dangerous tool, which is a camera, which would allow him to really go out there. And a camera, I imagined it pre-smartphone. Like, it's an age where it's set in an age where he could have had a smartphone, but in his community it would have been pretty hard to get a smartphone for his bar mitzvah. So he gets this camera, and then I added another layer of challenges to my character. A few years ago, I was in London just visiting my friends, and I noticed that at the dinner table there were two children that were not their kids, and I wondered, like, who are these kids? I do not recall seeing these kids before, and they explained to me later that they were kids from the community. Their Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jewish community that they belonged to. Basically, one woman had died, and the father was left with all these kids, and he could not possibly raise them on his own. Especially in Judaism, we really value the figure of the mother and the father together as a couple, raising their children and passing on their traditions. So at least as a temporary solutions, they had distributed, we could say, some of the kids among other families. And I was so touched by this, and I thought, oh wow, this is such a different level of collective reality that we rarely see in our own lives. And so I imagined a similar situation, and Carmi is an orphan, and he's adopted, at least temporarily, by Ezra's parents, and he walks into their home bringing really joy and like in Italian we would say una ventata d'aria fresca. How would we translate
breath
that?
of fresh air.
Thank you. And but at the same time, Carmi also has a terrible secret that he soon enough shares with his adoptive brother Ezra, and this will really change the game for all my characters. And a few years later, Ezra will leave the family, will leave the community, will really cut the ties, and will have to recreate his own set of values, his own set of friends, and he will go to New York, which is totally the opposite of the reality he came from. But Carmi, the memory of what Carmi had been in his family, will always remain. So this is more or less the story.
I can see you're leaving some things in suspense for our readers, which is, what is Carmi's secret? You have to go upstairs and buy the book.
Trying to give an incentive also for the American readership, maybe, to translate the book.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about the community which Ezra is from and why he decides to break off with it? Because I think that's very explicit in, again, the passage that you just read, that he had this relationship with his parents and his family, with his rabbi and his community for a very long time. And then literally, and in fact, I looked at the book again today, I think it's literally the very middle of the book, he too will break out of that community. So give us an idea of that community and who's a part of it and why he might want to leave.
Well, while this is not an autobiography, a lot of the realities I talk about in the books are realities that I've experienced in my family, friends, and other places where I've traveled also as a journalist later on in life. So I was deeply inspired by some of the people I've met and to write Grandangolo. And really this story is it's not a specific story about the Orthodox community. I tried to create a more universal story that a lot of people could identify with. And although I don't know if I succeeded, I can see, by seeing a lot of my audience is not Jewish, is Italian, does not know much about what I'm writing about, they can still identify in the story. And this is the story of a kid who questions the reality that he's raised in. And I think that's pretty universal. Like wherever we're raised, wherever we are born, there is a moment in life when we start questioning our parents, what they've taught us, our leaders of our communities, our teachers, and this is exactly what Ezra does. He questions, and so throughout the whole book, he starts questioning everything. There's one thing that he never questions, is his ability to take good photos, which is really, like, the camera is really the only certainty in his life. And the camera will start being kind of the tool of his rebellion in the beginning of the book. Later on in the book, it's the tool for his emancipation, his economic freedom, because he goes to New York, he's pretty successful. And then at the very end of the book, it has a political value. He realizes that with the camera, he can do something more than just taking photos of a model in New York, in a studio in New York. He can really document a moment in history. And that's, what I did with the camera in Ezra.
So what's interesting is that Grandangolo, in the phrase that he uses when he's criticizing his mother, has a very negative, very pejorative meaning, right? I mean, saying you made the horizon so wide to include God, to include the community, that, little old me, I just became a little blurry object in the foreground. And yet, can you also see Grandangolo, in the case of his life, as a constant widening of his own horizons? Are you ever critical of him as a character? I mean, does he ever make a few things blurry that perhaps shouldn't have become so.
100%. So the first draft of my book, in the first draft, I depicted Ezra as much less likable than he is now. I didn't want to create the boring hero that does everything right. And in the book, if you read it, he does some pretty controversial things. He makes some big mistakes. And I did not explicitly in the book, this is not a moral reading of my own book, so I did not explicitly say, oh, this was wrong. You did something very wrong here. You did wrong to yourself, to your family, to your friends, but he does those mistakes. And this is later on, also thanks to the help of my publisher, like we try to make Ezra a little more friendly. But at the same time, Ezra is a teenager whose priority is to find himself. He doesn't have any time for anybody else. And that really speaks for itself. He's arrogant and he thinks he's always right, and he does this, he moves this big accusation to his mother, which is pretty powerful, I think. But at the same time, we can see in it that he's still just a little over a teenager at that point in the book, and he's still very self-centered. And but at a certain point in the book, he starts questioning himself too. He starts saying, I was so busy thinking of my own priorities that I really forgot about everything else. And I think that's a pretty important moment for me in the book.
No, and I think you really succeed in making this about not just someone from a certain kind of community who breaks free, but it is a kind of coming of age narrative. And so I'm just curious, and I'm sure our audiences as well, who has kind of influenced you in pulling together this kind of narrative. I love your detail when I first asked you about the story and saying you were watching this family a few years ago in London, and that gave you the idea for bringing in the figure of Carmi. But in terms of this kind of coming of age, a young man liberating himself from his very restrictive community, who else has inspired you in this voyage?
Well, I've got a pretty eclectic number of inspirations from Poland to America to Italy, all the way to Japan. I'll tell you in a minute. One of the books that most inspired me was The Karnofsky Family by Israel Singer, who's the brother of the famous Nobel Prize winner. It came out in Italy just a few years ago with Adelphi, and I thought, when I read it, I thought, okay, this is, like, I found myself in it. It was a book in itinere, we call it in Italian. It moves, the characters move, and it starts in Poland, then it continues in Germany, and then it ends in America. And my characters do that too, and I would find it pretty challenging to try to write about a character that is constantly in the same place. I think this is a good challenge I should put upon myself maybe in a future piece of writing. But there are other books. There is one by Banana Yoshimoto, who is a Japanese writer. She wrote Kitchen. That was a pretty groundbreaking book in Italy when it was translated. And she creates a very sophisticated intimacy between her characters. I don't think I nearly managed to do that, but I took her as an inspiration when I placed Ezra and Carmi in their bedroom and made them talk and made them open up to each other. And she was definitely a great inspiration for that.
No, I think that's an incredibly important moment when Carmi reveals the secret that you need to read the book to find out. And you really get a sense of it's the middle of the night, and Carmi's not sleeping, and Ezra is worrying about him. And I think that, I think what you said a second ago about Ezra's kind of conceitedness, he really is impressed with himself, and he really is impatient, and he really does have issues with his community. And yet in this friendship between these two young men, you see, as a result of this intimacy, him growing up. And so in a way, it's taking in this new brother into his home that really makes him begin to kind of search his own soul and to realize perhaps some of his shortcomings. So I think you portrayed that particular relationship really quite beautifully. And so I want to thank you again for that, and thank your influences for enabling you to write so well. And speaking of writing, as Stefano mentioned, Simone is also getting his graduate degree in journalism. And so I'm just wondering how you feel that your work as a journalist and your interest in journalism has really influenced your other identity as a novelist.
Mm-hmm. On a very simple level, I think, learning how to write on deadline helped me a lot as a novelist, because a lot of people who write novels, they struggle with, writer's block, and I started writing a novel and I'm never gonna finish it, and instead I really told myself, okay, I'm gonna write 1,000 words every night, I'm just gonna finish it. And that's why the first draft of Grandangolo was written in just a few months, and then of course it took a long time to edit, to try to perfect it, although of course I will never look at it and think, oh, this is perfect. I could still use many more edits, but as everything that I write afterwards, I keep looking at it, I look at it and I'm like, okay, I cannot see it anymore, it's just so, I would change this and that. But I think just being an aspiring journalist and traveling with my work too, it really allowed me to create a really global character that kind of global influence that I have on my own life, it definitely had some sort of effect on my character, and it will have in the future also my future writings. Yeah.
I mean, I have to say that your writing style is so limpid and clear and just really precise that I'm thinking that stylistically as well, I feel like your own work in journalism has probably influenced your tone and your kind of linguistic priorities as a writer. So I think that's really impressive as well. And of course, Ezra kind of becomes a photojournalist, right, by the end of this novel. So in a way, his own career moves towards yours in some interesting senses. And I guess I want to push you a little bit more to just ask, what kinds of parallels might there be in your lives?
Well, at the end of the book, Ezra finds himself, I will not tell you how, but he finds himself in Bahrain, which is people are going to be like, why is this book? I thought I took the boring novel of the guy who leaves his Jewish community and becomes secular, which is not really what the book is about. And all of a sudden, he's in Bahrain as a photographer. And he finds himself in a very particular moment in the politics of the country. And while I wrote this, I was following a lot of local blogs, and I was very inspired by the story of an attempt to some kind of sort of Arab Spring. And I thought, oh, no one knows about this. And I kind of included it into Ezra's life. And Ezra, by luck, finds himself at the right place at the right time. But it's not easy, because taking the courage to grab that camera and leave the hotel which he was not supposed to leave and go take photos of, which you'll find out later in the book, but that takes a lot of courage. And I think having an idea is one thing, going out there and doing it is very different. So I think this is not, like, your question was about parallels between Ezra and I. Of course, every time you write, there is something about yourself, a little thing, but maybe it's not in Ezra, maybe it's in Viviana, or it's in some other character. There's even an Italian character, spoiler alert. But what happens is that definitely I wanted to create a more scenic, let's say, ending. And because at the end of the day, I was writing it as a 21-year-old. I wanted the big movie ending, but at the same time, I said, let's take Ezra by the hand and take him to the next level of his story. And even though the book ends in a specific place, I will not tell you where, it does not mean that Ezra will stay there. Definitely, he will continue moving.
So I'm not allowed to say where it ends.
Oh yeah, we can say it. It's okay. It ends in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Well, because it just feeds into a question I had, Simone, which is about it's your last sentence in your acknowledgement, and I just wanted to read that, because I think it's, again, this is where my thinking of Simone as journalist, Simone as novelist, this is kind of one way in which you're different but clearly overlapping identities come together. And so at the very end of your acknowledgements, you say that you wrote this book to shed light on a number of issues that you take especially seriously. And you mention 4 things: religious fanaticism, freedom of the press, cultural appropriations, and self-harm or self-mutilation. And I think that what's kind of intriguing, especially about the very first subject, religious fanaticism, is that absolutely, we just saw in the passage that Simone read, we saw the case of a young man who's rebelling against the orthodoxy, the ultra-orthodoxy of his very, very conservative parents. And yet there's a moment towards the end of the book. He's in Bahrain. There is an Arab Spring. And all of his colleagues who were with him at this point, who were doing a shoot for their magazine, which is interestingly called Dope, which I don't know if that's a comment on something, but I'll just let that out there. They all, are terrorized by what's going on, and they get on the first plane to go back to New York. And Ezra, being his usual cantankerous, risk-taking self, doesn't go back to New York, right? As you said, he does something very daring with respect to what is going on, this very politically charged moment in Bahrain. And then he gets on a plane to go 45 minutes away to Tel Aviv.
Well, first he goes to Jordan.
First he goes to Jordan,
flight.
exactly. And then he goes to Tel Aviv. But you have an interesting moment where you talk about his leaving Bahrain and going to Tel Aviv. And if you don't mind, I'll just read this very, very brief passage. He says that he was liberated, right, as he's leaving the Arab world and going to Israel. And he says, I had escaped from that crazy world in which women wear veils, in which human rights are obstructed, and minorities are discriminated against, to arrive in un luogo libero, right, a place where you could be free, and a place that Ezra describes as vivace and somewhat familiar to him. And so there's this interesting irony that I'd love for you to unpack a little bit. Here's this young man, again, raised in this ultra-orthodox community who clearly feels this is a place where you cannot be free. And now he's in this, for a relatively brief time, but nonetheless, he's there in an Arab world where he is rebelling because he feels here's another world, the Islamic version of that world where he cannot be free. And arriving in Tel Aviv at the end of the novel, he says, now I'm in a luogo libero. Here's a place where there is freedom. And so I just love for you to comment on that a little bit. Like I said, there's something a bit paradoxical about this. On the other hand, clearly there are many versions of Judaism, as he points out in the conversation with his mother, right? Why didn't you tell me there were other forms of Judaism? Why did you only share this one with me? And she's like, well, that's what we believe in. That's the Judaism that we believe in. And I guess, I'm curious about what kind of Judaism you think you will find in Israel, and what are you saying here in terms of religious fanaticism, I guess, both as a novelist, but perhaps also as a journalist who does want to acknowledge that there are important social issues that have really driven you to write what you have.
Well, in that moment, he feels, I found my heaven, I'm free. Of course, minutes later, when he's actually in Tel Aviv, new questions will arise. So it shows also kind of the impeto, how do you say that, of Ezra saying, always, judging things. But I'll tell you something, Ezra had spent his whole life trying to being Jewish when he was in New York after he left his community was easy, and he didn't have to think about it too much, and he could afford to deny his own identity. The minute he's in Bahrain, where he realizes he would not openly talk about his Judaism, and his assistant is gay, and they start talking together, I'm like, I'm Jewish, and his assistant is saying, like, I'm gay, I don't feel comfortable here. And he just all of a sudden realizes that he's in a place where that identity that he had so long tried to hide, all of a sudden is being kind of almost suppressed by some other entity. And he doesn't like that so much, and he feels the need to rediscover it. And he, as always, he goes from one extreme to the other, so he takes a plane and he goes to Tel Aviv. Also, as soon as he arrives to Tel Aviv, something new happens, and doesn't get as easy as he had thought it would get. But yeah, I think it pushed Ezra into different extremes, and I challenged him with that. Yeah.
No, and I think that's a really nice way to do it. And there's one point, again, kind of toward the middle of the book, it's after Carmi has disappeared, and Ezra has gone to New York, and he's just eaten his first non-kosher meat. Right, he's living in Brooklyn at this point, and you refer to this moment as a kind of zona grigia, right? This kind of in-between or gray zone, as the zone in which he really would like to be able to live his life, right? I mean, so in a way you could say, or maybe I should ask this rather as a question. I mean, is this kind of part of what the book is about, the articulation of that zona grigia, and how do we find it, and when we find it, how do we live in it? Can he still call himself a Jew at the end of the book? I guess is also one of my questions.
Ezra tells Carmi towards the beginning of the book, he tells him, I promise you there's something in between. We don't have to go to the other extreme if we don't like where we're in right now. And he kind of promises that there is this gray area, he calls it, where they will get to. Carmi doesn't get there, you will find out in the book, but Ezra also doesn't get there. The minute that he's in New York, he totally steps over that gray area and goes all the way to the other side. And kind of this is the struggle of the whole book, trying to find that gray area. When he arrives to Tel Aviv at the end, he thinks about it and he said, oh wow, I really did not keep that promise I had made to Carmi, and tries to find a new solution to it. Can he still call himself a Jew? I think the answer is in what he feels the minute that he's in Bahrain. He definitely feels like he probably wanted to be a Jew.
So the identity is really dependent on the place in which he finds himself, in other words. Which I think is one reason why, you said we'll look forward to your future novel where you are basing yourself in one little place.
Oh, it's not the next. But
well, down the road. But I think that by having the kind of itinerary that you do here, you really do allow the complexities of your character to really manifest themselves, and I think that's quite wonderful. In the passage you read us, it's a dialogue with his mother, and we've been talking about kind of the boys in the novel. But I'm curious about the women. What can you tell us about maybe your favorite female character, and then I'll tell you who my favorite female character was.
Oh, I would love to hear that.
You go first.
I mean, all of my characters are my favorites, of course. But there are several important women in the story. First of all, there is the mother, who is kind of an ambivalent figure in the book, but there is the aunt, who is the help, the woman who really helps Ezra with everything. And in the passage we read, he realizes that he had not even been grateful to her, but he owed everything to her. And she's a pretty funny figure. And the book really opens the first sentence of the book. So how I did the book is that every chapter starts, the title of the chapter is the beginning of the first sentence, and then it continues.
It's great.
It's
genius.
Something, I don't know if that's genius, but that's something.
He even has a zero chapter. He has chapter zero,
chapter,
which is even more genius.
And so this, as a writer, was a good challenge for me to start writing. Like every first sentence had to begin in a way that would be worthy of being the title of the book. And the first chapter says, Aunt Susie offered me food, but I refused it. And it shows that Aunt Susie is not a religious Jew, and it immediately shows the contrast between different identities. There's Viviana. Viviana is a famous photographer, successful photographer. She's Italian, she lives in New York, and he starts off at a certain point as her intern. And she gives him a big opportunity. And there is an interesting sentence she says, in Italy, it would have been crazy to believe in my dream. In America, it would have been crazy. In New York, it would have been crazy not to believe in my dream. And I think, even though the book is not really an Italian novel, it's not really about Italy, there are hints of my perception as an Italian young man. So.
She's a wonderful, forceful character. What about the therapist?
Oh, that gets, there's a pretty steamy scene.
Yes, so if you like steamy scenes, it's in chapter 3.
Well, the therapist, parents at a certain point after he does something pretty controversial at the beginning of the book with his camera, they send the son to a therapist and they think, oh, what's wrong with you? We need to seek help. And the therapist happens to kind of lead Ezra in the exact opposite direction than the one that his parents had aimed for. And it gets pretty steamy there. I'm not going to reveal anything.
Well, I like the mother a lot. I think that the mother is, again, as we saw in the passage that Simone read, she's incredibly torn. She loves her son, she loves her husband. Her husband and son are no longer talking. She is the mediator, right, in between the two men she loves most in the world. And I think one thing Simone hasn't mentioned is that it's also the case that his parents are the first in their family to move into a much more orthodox community than their own parents had been a part of. And so this is a new this is new for them, right? And so perhaps as recent converts, as it were, they're exceptionally conservative, exceptionally orthodox, right? I mean, they're going in whole hog into being part of this community in which, again, they're not used to living. So it's interesting that, therefore, the Aunt Susie, same generation as the mother, but obviously has not taken on this step. So you get a sense, and I think you do this quite beautifully, of the mother's dilemma. She knows she's made this step. She knows that she's hurt her son. She knows that perhaps in many ways she's hurt herself. And yet she's the only person who can really try to balance everything. And at the end doesn't really succeed. And so I think there's something, as a mother myself, with a son exactly your age, watching this kind of drama unfold in an unbelievably tender way that I think respects both Ezra's independence, but also his mother's torments, is just really beautifully done. So I want to compliment you on the way that you've handled these family relationships.
Thank you. That was the hardest part, I think. It's easy to identify with Ezra and imagine what he would say. It's pretty harder. It's harder to imagine what his mother would say, or what his dad would say, or what the rabbi would say. Like, there are different characters, and I needed to move them too in the story. Mm-hmm. And although the prospettiva is really from Ezra's camera, I still tried to give voice to all these other characters. And the mother is in a pretty tough position. She's desperate to belong. She's chosen with her husband to pursue that lifestyle of being, in Hebrew we call them like balei tshuva, like they decided to return into the answer to these Judaism. And at the same time, she's a mother. She loves her son. Even her husband doesn't know, but she constantly sends help to Ezra even while he's in New York, and he's cut ties with them. And for Ezra, that's not enough. And you can do that until a certain point, and Ezra wants more, and there is definitely a struggle there and tension.
Mm-hmm. No, and again, it's one that you really depicted beautifully, Simone. Well, I may ask one last question, then I feel like we should open things up to the audience. And I noticed as you opened the last page of the book that your book is part of an extremely important collana or series at Giuntina, a series called Diaspora, as I just learned, and authors like Elie Wiesel, the Polish writer Hanna Król. It's just a very impressive list. And most of them seem to be not Italian. I couldn't tell. I didn't research every single name on the list, but it looks like maybe you're one of the first people on this list who's actually writing in Italian as opposed to having a work translated. And it seems to me too that it's really a collana of diaspora that really does feature Jewish writers. And is that how do you consider yourself a Jewish writer? Is this something that this is really where you see your identity, at least for this romanzo being articulated?
Yes, I'm many things. I'm an Italian writer, I'm a Jewish writer. I am. And it was crazy to be offered to be part of that kind of collana, of that series of books. Giuntina is, I think, the largest Jewish publisher in Europe. And I don't know, but I'll tell you that there are very few Jewish writers in Italy that define themselves as Jewish writers and write about Jewish topics. So I think that probably was also one of the reasons that my book made so much noise. It was something that, while maybe in New York it's pretty common to see, in Italy it was truly something new. Yes. And that helped.
No, and so are you the first? I'm just curious. Are you the first Italian writer in this series?
We have the publisher here.
We have the publisher. Do you want to say something?
Of course, yes. No, because like I said, it's an extremely impressive list, and Simone is now, as an impressive writer himself, part of this wonderful group. So
yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Thank you to Casa Italiana for the hospitality. In 40 years of our publishing house, is our first event in New York. Wow. So this is the reason why we published Simone's book, of course. Of course, we didn't publish Simone's book because he's the first Italian Jewish writer, but because it's a beautiful book. Just a few words. As he sent us the manuscripts, I immediately felt that was something strong, and there was a writer behind it. And when I met Simone, besides his politeness and his nice way of being and proposing himself and being talented, I felt that he had the main ingredient to be a writer, that is the passion to tell a story. And I hope he will go on to write. I'm sure he will. And bravo, Simone, and thank you.
No, and as Stefano said, Simone spent most of January touring all of the Italian peninsula.
Professor Tylus was so kind to come to one of the events in La Feltrinelli in Florence.
And it was packed, as you can imagine. So this book has already had tremendous success in Italy. We look forward to various translations throughout the world, hopefully very soon into English. And I just want to thank all of you for being here to listen to our conversation and really ask if any of you have questions of the authors. I'm sure you will, to let us know. Yes?
So you have spoken a lot about a lot of characters in the book. I just happened to have read the book in Italian, actually to have devoured the book in the space of 5 hours. And one of the characters that you didn't mention tonight, that a character that intrigued me a lot, is the rabbi of the ultra-orthodox community who succeeds his father as the rabbi. And while the father really fit in as a very strict traditional rabbi, the son, while he fits into the structure of the community and outwardly he fits in perfectly with that mentality and structure, behind the scenes acts as a kind of fairy godmother to several of the characters, and somehow decides to stay within that very strict structure, while at the same time hiding a particularly open mentality and a capacity for seeing people's souls. So I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that character, and if anybody in particular inspired you to create this character.
I think Rabbi Hirsch is one of the characters that speak the fewest words among my characters, but at the end of the book you understand that behind that silence of just that ability to express himself with very few words, there was a larger, higher ability to act and to change people's lives. So definitely I think sometimes less talking and more acting is something that we could all learn from. Our Italian politicians could learn from it.
American politicians could learn. Less tweeting, more acting.
So he does have a very he's a key figure in the book. And he's the one that, thank you for asking that question, because he's the one that fewer people notice and ask about, but he is one of the most meaningful actors in my play, yeah.
Did anybody inspire that character?
Who knows?
Yes, way in the back.
I'm curious why you chose Boston rather than Rome and Florence, one of the major cities in Italy. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. The Italian book was written in Boston.
Well, the book,
Simone, can you repeat the question?
this gentleman asked why I chose to set the book in Boston, if there was a meaning behind it. The book is set in Boston, but it's not a story about Boston at all. I was inspired by Boston as a location because I lived there for 1 year when I was in high school, and I was living in Newton. Most of the story is in Brighton, Massachusetts. And I returned while I was writing the book for a week to find my places and my locations for the book, and in that trip I also came to New York to find the other places for the book. So I felt really like a movie producer searching for the locations for every scene. But I think I wanted to, first of all, I was writing in Italian. I think it was easier maybe to distance myself from the characters and make the readers not to not to try to find too many similarities in the characters and see it more as a universal story where they were reading about a reality that was so distant, but which was still so close. Like whatever happens in his family kind of may happen also in an Italian family. And of course now it's different. Here in New York it's closer to home, but still I think I just was fascinated by those places and I located my characters there. Thank you.
Yes, way back.
Yeah, obviously have not read the book, but just from this discussion, the question that I have is, it seems to me that some of the investigation that you're doing here is finding a certain sense of freedom of an outside world that was unknown, and then coming back to the realization that there is a freedom within that other constricted world that's different from freedom in the outside world. So I don't know if that's one of the things you're discussing in the book or not. Just curious.
Well, definitely freedom is a theme of the book. Ezra wants to feel free. And sometimes we associate freedom with something that when we achieve it doesn't necessarily make us feel free. So there is this sort of question in the book, and maybe it's an open-ended question. Ezra doesn't necessarily find the answer.
Yes.
What is his age span?
It starts from where he's 14 years old or 15 years old, and it ends when Ezra is about 22, 23 years old. So it's just a shot in a very particular moment in time.
Is Carmi about the same age? It wasn't really clear.
Carmi is 2 years younger than Ezra.
I know we're not allowed to ask this question, but are you working on a second novel? And if so, what's it about?
Well, my publisher is here, so I'm not sure.
You're not allowed to tell.
But I'm constantly writing. You know, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, why I write fiction in Italian, is that it's a release for me at the end of the day. I spend the day writing in English as a journalist, and I'm in a journalism program. I'm working now at Tablet, so I'm constantly writing in English, and I always have to write about true facts. And sitting at my computer at my desk at night and writing in Italian, my mother tongue, and also being able to open those virgolette, those
little quotation marks, yeah.
quotation marks and make up whatever I write after that. Journalists here know what I'm talking about. Like, you would never. It's pretty daring act to just say, okay, I'll open the quotation marks now. I'm gonna make up everything, and so this is kind of a form of rebellion, maybe, and it's a form of release. And people from the outside just see me constantly writing and writing. It doesn't make any difference, and inside I'm actually doing very different things. And of course, I will always continue doing that. Hopefully, yeah.
So this is a real liberation, moving back into your mother tongue after a long,
Yes.
hard day at work in New York.
And you know what the next challenge will be? Taking my characters to Italy. And I will do it.
Well, that goes back to the question that was asked earlier. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, and I will do it. And it will be hard, but that's my next goal.
That's great. Well, I think the fact that you start in Boston, go to New York, and in fact, NYU is also mentioned. I should have said this earlier. He's actually Ezra is accepted at NYU.
Doesn't go there though.
It doesn't go there, but
They don't
Yes.
give him a scholarship good enough, I think.
yes, Baruch College gave him a better scholarship, so we should take note here at NYU.
I wrote this way before even knowing myself that I would go to NYU. I wrote it 3 years ago, so I had no idea.
Well, we're glad that Simone was not only accepted into NYU, but that he decided to come to NYU. Otherwise, we may not be sitting here tonight. But I just want to ask you to join me in celebrating this wonderful romanzo. I hope you will run upstairs and get a copy. And if you don't know Italian, just learn it so you can read it. You can take classes here at Casa Italiana. And I want to thank Stefano Albertini, as always, for making this possible.